Here's a guy who thinks he can prove that atheism is a fraud.
Most atheists hold to some form of biological evolution. Many Big Bang models would assert that the universe is billions of years old and that all came together from one singularity.
What do you mean by came together from one singularity? The universe didn't come together at all, let alone from a singularity. It seems to be a common misconception among apologists that the Big Bang theory says that the universe was created by a singularity. It wasn't. The universe was not created at all. You can't create something at a time when it already exists, and there was never a time when the universe did not already exist. The singularity was simply the earliest form of the universe.
After which it started evolving over time. I will be logically proving why this cannot be the case. And I will also be providing reasons why that even though there's enough evidence that God exists, people still reject him anyway. Firstly, claiming that the universe came from a singularity is illogical.
I agree. That makes it sound like the singularity caused the universe to exist. This is not the case. The singularity was simply the earliest form of the universe. It did not create the universe. It was the universe.
Since a singularity can create nothing at all, since it is a singularity and is not intelligent,
I agree that the singularity did not create the universe, but not because it wasn't intelligent. Why would something unintelligent be able to create nothing at all? Clouds create raindrops. Are they therefore intelligent? Continental drift creates mountains. Are the continents therefore intelligent? Fire creates ashes. Is fire therefore intelligent?
This singularity would also have to be infinite if it was what was in the beginning.
Infinite in what sense? Obviously, if it existed for an infinite amount of time, it couldn't have existed at the beginning of time, because in order for it to be infinitely old, there could never have been a beginning of time.
Which is much less logical than saying God is infinite.
Why? If God had been around for an infinite amount of time, then he couldn't have been around during the beginning of time either, and for the same reason. The universe is the space-time continuum, so if the universe is not infinitely old, neither is time. And if time isn't infinitely old, nothing can be.
If you claim that this singularity is intelligent, then you would not be an atheist because this singularity would be your higher power.
Since the singularity is just the earliest form of the universe, if you believe the singularity to be intelligent, you'd just be a panpsychist, which is not necessarily the same thing as a theist.
But if you claim that it is not, then you would be saying that something that created everything was unintelligent.
I don't believe that the singularity created anything, but even if I did, why would it be the case that something that created everything would have to be intelligent?
Now, with all that put together, this is why if you claim a singularity created the universe and you still want to be an atheist, then you would have to claim that everything came from nothing.
Why would I have to claim that when I don't believe that there ever was nothing? Since the universe is the space-time continuum, there was, by definition, never a time when the universe did not exist. There was never a time when nothing existed. Therefore, the universe could not come from any prior nothingness.
Since this singularity, if it were infinite and intelligent, would be a God.
If you were a pantheist, you might conceive of it as a god. That's a pretty different god from the one you're trying to prove, though.
The problem with the universe being created by nothing, however, is that if the universe came from nothing, why do we have such order?
There are two very common assumptions among apologists about the default state of reality. One is that the default state is nothingness, and therefore existence is some kind of deviation from the norm that requires a cause. The other is that insofar as unintelligent things exist, their default state is chaos, and order is a deviation from the norm that must be consciously imposed. Both of these assumptions are baseless. There is no reason to assume that the default state of reality is non-existence, nor is there any reason to assume that the default state is chaos.
Asserting that nothing could create everything that we see around us also goes against the law of conservation of mass.
Asserting that a god could create everything around us also goes against the law of conservation of mass,
which claims that matter is not created or destroyed. Evolution is so often deemed scientific, but it actually goes against the own scientific principles that have been gathered by people throughout time.
Where does the theory of evolution say that the law of conservation of mass is broken? What mass needs to be created or destroyed in order for life to evolve? This guy must be one of the many apologists who conflate Big Bang cosmology with evolution. Evolution has nothing to do with the creation of the universe. I know this guy says that cosmologists claim that the universe evolved over time after the singularity, but even if you count that as a part of the theory of evolution, which it isn't, that still would not be a theory about the cause of the universe's existence in the first place.
Another common objection is people say, well, Doesn't God have to have a creator? And he doesn't, because this is why. Time, space, and matter were all created, and there has to be something beyond time, space, and matter to create all things in the first place.
I would agree that something that exists independent of time, space, and matter would not need to be caused to exist, because it, by definition, would not exist at all. To exist means to have location in space-time. Without space-time, there is, by definition, no existence. Things that don't exist don't need causes.
Now, a Christian would say that the original, first beginning, the start of everything, and the beginning and the end would be God. But an atheist would have to default to nothing being the beginning and the end.
No, I don't believe there ever was nothing, or ever will be nothing.
In fact, there is enough evidence to prove that God has to exist and evolution cannot be true.
You've said nothing that contradicts the theory of evolution. Even if a God created the universe, evolution could still be true.
But the reason is this, for why people do not believe in him. John 3:20 says, "For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his works should be exposed."
Since you would regard simply being an atheist as committing some kind of evil works, I think it's pretty clear that I'm not afraid of exposure. I'm obviously not hiding my atheism.
People are naturally inclined to make up their own image of God in their minds or deny him completely because of the bad things that they do. The reason why we hate God is the same reason why a burglar might hate a police officer.
Do burglars typically deny the existence of police officers or come up with their own ideas of police officers that are actually okay with burglary? If not, then this analogy doesn't really illustrate your argument about why people deny the existence of God.
They've done something wrong and they don't want to get caught.
If God exists, how would denying his existence keep me from getting caught?
Even though it's completely logical for God to exist, people do not want the moral accountability that comes with believing in him.
You make it sound as though not believing in him absolves people of that moral accountability. Do you believe that to be the case? Do you believe that everyone who does not believe in God goes unpunished in the afterlife? If that's the case, why would you want to convert anyone to theism? If accountability only comes with believing in God, and we have no accountability if we're all atheists, then none of us go to hell. Converting people would be a terrible thing to do.
This might seem far-fetched, especially to my atheists out there, but let me prove that the reason is because people hate God. We can also intuitively know that God is serious about sin by the fact that people die. Here's why. The Bible says in Romans 1:20, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse." It also says in Romans 6:23 that the wages of sin is death.
So then why did Jesus, who supposedly never sinned, die? If your answer is that he died to take the punishment for sinners, then why does every Christian also die? Why do they have to pay the wages of sin if Jesus paid those wages on their behalf?
Very quickly, I would also like to address a common argument that people say against Christians that use the Bible to prove the Bible. I am proving the Bible with the Bible as much as you could prove that the president lives in the White House by looking inside the White House.
By that logic, I can prove that Spider-Man exists by looking inside of comic books.
You can see that the Bible's true about what it says about itself because it actually says things that we can look at outside the world and see if the world attests to the Bible.
So where can we see God outside of the Bible? Where can we see the resurrection of Jesus outside of the Bible?
Many atheists actually use the existence of death as a reason why God cannot be good or righteous. However, they use this argument because they do not understand that they are guilty against God and how serious God takes sin.
I guess he takes sin more seriously than salvation, because if the reason we die is because of sin, then Jesus never saved anybody.
The other religions of the world, other than Christianity, do not have answers for death that are coherent, that are logical, that make sense. Because why would God allow bad things to happen to good people? But the better question is, why does God allow good things to happen to bad people? Because we've sinned against him. And the answer is, he has amazing grace and mercy and steadfast love that we don't see because we think we deserve no harm done to us because we think we're good.
So in other words, the existence of his grace and mercy is indistinguishable from the absence of his grace and mercy.
The Bible also claims this. It says most men proclaim their own goodness. And when people say that they're good people or they like to assert their own goodness, as I have personally seen many times when I've asked people if they believe themselves to be good people, It proves the Bible. We are bad people because God's righteous is infinitely higher than our righteous, and he demands eternal payment for our finite sin because that finite sin has eternal consequences. Every finite sin that we do is a sin against an eternal God.
This makes it sound like every sin does some form of injury to God from which he can never heal. If God is forever hurt by every tiny sin, he is the most fragile entity in the cosmos, and beyond, supposedly.
And it demands an eternal payment. And unless you believe this, what I'm about to say next will sound like utter foolishness to you. The only credible religion to have a payment system for sin that is not somehow working off our bad deeds is Christianity. Working off our bad deeds does not even work in a court of law.
Then why does anybody get sentenced to community service?
And it certainly will not work for the God of the Bible, who is a righteous judge, as Psalm 7:11 describes him. This is why there's eternal payment for, in actuality, our eternal sin, which is either hell or the eternal sacrifice of Jesus Christ.
What was the eternal sacrifice of Jesus Christ? Is Jesus in hell, burning forever? Or was the death he experienced for 3 whole days the eternal sacrifice?
Have you heard about what Jesus did? He was fully God and fully man, lived a perfect life, and died on the cross as the perfect sacrifice for sins.
If dying on the cross is the perfect sacrifice for sins, why is the punishment for sin eternal torment in hell? How are these two things comparable?
God really showed his true love, that he is the embodiment of love and is not willing that any perish, but that all come to repentance. But if you hardened your heart against this message and do not trust in him, there is no hope. Similar to if you had a fine for billions of dollars that you could never pay off in court. If someone else, a very rich man, paid off that fine for you, you could be free to go. And Jesus did this on a much, much greater extent because he was the only one that could pay an eternal fine because he was the eternal God.
Again, it seems to be the case that God is so fragile that to him, being crucified is equivalent to an eternity of torment. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.